What I want to talk to you about tonight is evangelization in a post-rational culture. So I'm Jewish by birth. I grew up in a very difficult situation. The first Catholic I ever met was my stepfather, who beat my mother into the emergency room, terrorized me and our family, fired a gun in our home, destroyed our home end to end in a drunken rage. And in between all of that, attempted to convince me that the Catholic Church was the one true faith. I want to assure you that is not what John Paul II had in mind with the new evangelization. But in a sort of serious, tragic way, my home was filled with abuse, the spiritual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. My mother was involved in the occult. By the time I was around 20, I was ready to end it, because though I had left home, when you leave abuse, it doesn't leave you. It stays with you, and it tormented me. And so for me, around 20 years old, it was a bullet or a reason, because I had really no rational reason to live and continue to experience what I was experiencing interiorly, if there was no reason for suffering. And so, but God is merciful, and though I didn't know him at all, he does answer the prayers of those who don't know him, those who desire for a reason to live and to live out the existence that he desires for us. And so I began a search. And what I want to tell you about is a handful of people who know how to evangelize in this culture, though, of course, for me, it was quite a long time ago. But the approach they used is timeless, but more timely in our time than any other time. If I were to subtitle this talk, it would be Apologetics of Extraordinary Love. So I want to tell you about a few people and in my life and how they helped me to put the gun away, put the bullet away, and find meaning and purpose in life. The first guy I met, so I had left home and went off to school to Phoenix, Arizona, and I went to work for Pizza Hut. My dad was very successful. He made his first million at 30 out of poverty and a single mother, alcoholic father, similar to the man that was terrorizing our family when I was younger. But he was a hard dude, so he didn't give me anything. He wouldn't, which I'm really grateful for, because so many children are wrecked by money and not learning how to be responsible. So at least he did that for me. So I had to work while I was in school. My first job working was for Pizza Hut. And the challenge is that because I was in such distress and in so much interior turmoil, I was not a friendly person, because when you grow up like I did, you create these barriers, and the goal is to keep other humans away, because humans hurt, right? And so the best way to do that is to treat them poorly. And so that was generally my outward comportment, was to treat people poorly. And so when I was at Pizza Hut, there was this guy named Mark, and he used to finish his work early. I didn't know this at first. I figured it out later. And then, but my experience of him is he shimmied up beside me one day and said, "Hey, I finished my work, and can I help you with the dishes?" And I thought, okay, you're an idiot. Sure, you can help me with the dishes. I didn't say it, of course. I just thought it. I was like, well, I don't want to do dishes, so you can go ahead and do the dishes. And then he did it another day. And then he did it another day. Interesting. One day I complained because I was on my first day of duty to clean bathrooms. Anybody clean bathrooms in a public restaurant before? Mark volunteered to clean the bathrooms in my stead. In the midst of all of that, so I couldn't figure him out, because people were not good, generally, for me. And so after a while, I'm trying to figure out his motive, and the motive I came up with is I just thought he was gay. I thought he was hitting on me, because I'm like, why would you be so nice to me? And so So I decided, in my family tradition, the way you dealt with that then amongst men was you put the other guy's lights out and just let him know in certain terms that you weren't interested, but violence was a good, permanent way of doing that. So I took him out back, and I have no memory of what I said to him, but I remember him backing up and saying, no, I'm a Christian. I'm supposed to be nice. This is what we do, So funny. So then he told me this beautiful story about how he was a cocaine addict and how Jesus had liberated him from that addiction and how he turned around his life. And, he tried to take me to church. I went in and left early because of the way people looked at me, which, if you can imagine, I don't need to paint a picture of how I looked then, but evangelical church folks were, I made them uncomfortable, or at least that was my perception. So I left before the service even began. Mark, funny enough, offered to, he said, you want to study the Bible together? And I thought, what does that look like? And he said, well, we read the Bible together and we talk about how we feel about it. And I thought, wow, that's gay. There's no way. I told him, I said, if you want to blow something up, if you want to go out in the desert shooting, I'm good, but there's no way I'm sitting with another dude talking about my feelings about the Bible. So it tells you a little bit about where I was at. But I was deeply moved by Mark. Love builds a bridge over which truth can pass, even to the hardest of hearts. Love builds a bridge over which truth can pass. Our friends at Catholic Answers are like the best institution on the planet for evangelism with truth. But what has to precede those messages is acts of extraordinary love. Mark looked past my exterior and looked past the discomfort that I caused him and everyone in my path for decades, and witnessed to me, told me about Jesus, told me the truth. But he loved me first, which is vital in our culture, because people in our culture, logic means nothing to them. Rationality means nothing to them. But if you give yourself in love to them, it opens a door, it builds a bridge, and then truth can pass over. So Mark was my first encounter with extraordinary love. My second one was with a pastor named Les at a Southern Baptist church in Covina, California. I was born in Arcadia. And I started listening to evangelical radio because Mark was one of those. I never really went to church. I never really came to Jesus. I did cry out to him. I do remember that. And Mark was part of that answer. But I started going to the Southern Baptist church. And it was funny because I listened to Walter Martin. Anybody listen to Dr. Walter Martin on radio? No converts in the room? I don't know. I liked him because he was a jerk. And he was super blunt, and he was an apologist with a kind of a competing organization. I can't remember what they're called. The Bible Answer Man. Yeah, that's right, Bible Answer Man. And so he said he let it slip one day that he was a Southern Baptist. And so I thought, well, I'll just go find a Southern Baptist church. So I just opened the white pages. Y'all know what that is? Are you old enough to know what a white page is? And triangulated the closest Southern Baptist church. I just assumed they're all the same. So I went in, and to get all incognito, I sat way in the back. And funny enough, this wasn't a back row Baptist church. It was a front row Baptist church. So the first 5 pews filled up. There were about 20 empty pews, and me sitting incognito, listening to this service. I was really moved by it. Never can get past the emotion. I was moved by people singing in harmony together. Such a simple thing. But I remember just being blown away by it. So because I was incognito, Les, the pastor, saw me and approached me after the service was over. And he said, what are you going to do? It's classic Protestant, like right for the jugular. I guess Carl Keating might be the Catholic example, but so he said, what are you going to do when you face Jesus at the end of your life and your judgment? And he asked you, why should I let you in? And I remember saying to him, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. I said, but if you can help me and give me answers, I said, I'm dying inside and I need help. And so if you'll help me, I'll listen to you. So he agreed to meet with me and my cousin, who's now a professor of epistemology at a Reformed college in Iowa, which is very interesting. But he met with us every Thursday night for an entire year. And he went through a book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict, which is a survey. It's from a legal standpoint. There's another great book for you lawyers in the room. I think there's a bunch of you. Called by Simon Greenleaf, who wrote the definitive works in the 19th century on evidence, that used for how you determine what's valid evidence and not. And he wrote a book called, what was it called? Testimony of the Four Witnesses. And he was an atheist, and he applied the rules of evidence against the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, and was convinced that the gospel writers were actually telling the truth, and he became a Christian. By Simon Greenleaf. Fascinating work. But this book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, took a similar tact, and so it examined all the archaeological evidence for the veracity of the Old Testament, is where we started, because I'm a Jew, right? So that's where we started. And then eventually we got to the New Testament and all of the prophecies of the Messiah that Jesus fulfilled. And in that little church, one day, I bent my knee and submitted. That's the way I thought of it. This whole invite your Jesus into your heart thing didn't really work for me. I thought, he's God, I'm not, I'm a wreck. I have a desperate need, please help me. So it was a kneeling kind of response to the reality that Jesus is God. He is the Messiah. And so he became my Messiah. Ever since then, I've been a lunatic for Jesus. I did door-to-door evangelism in Los Angeles, which to some very difficult neighborhoods, and I've really never stopped, just a little different means of doing that. But Les, while Mark loved me with acts of service, Les loved me with time, gave me the time. And really, again, proved his love for me by giving before he tried to teach me the truth. He answered my questions. He was very patient with me. And I was, frankly, a belligerent ass. I didn't care about, he was a minister, but that didn't mean anything to me. He was a guy that might have answers. That meant something to me. Maybe like Walter Martin, who had a lot of credibility in my mind. Love builds a bridge over which truth can pass. The next encounter that I had was with a woman named Phyllis. Now, Phyllis was evil. Phyllis was a real problem, because I went to work for Focus on the Family, Dr. James Dobson. Moral Majority, anyone remember those days? He was one of the major leaders, along with Billy Graham and Liberty University president, I can't remember his name. Jerry Falwell, yeah, exactly, yeah. And so I went to work for Focus on the Family. I was on fire. And this evil woman worked there named Phyllis, and the reason she was evil is because she was one of you. So you remember the first Catholic I ever met, and the terrorizing and the beating and the horrifying things that he did. This Southern Baptist church I joined was very anti-Catholic. And so my wounds fit really well with the false doctrine they were teaching. Roman Catholicism was the main text, if you remember that. You probably are familiar with it, Chris. Just full of lies and distortions. But Phyllis was evil and bad because she was one of you, and she was in an evangelical organization with a statement of faith that was anti-Catholic. And so I thought she just must have lied, and she's infiltrating. And so every time I passed Phyllis in the hallway, I would do what was done to me later. Well, not to me, but because I was attitudinally not one to be picked on ever. But we would do drive-bys. So I would tell Phyllis, because I was so full of love now, knowing Jesus, of course, I would tell Phyllis, you're going to hell. You're a Mary worshiper. What are you doing here at Focus on the Family? And Phyllis was a lousy apologist for Catholicism. I don't remember a word that she ever said. But Phyllis never ran away from me. So I still, like, while I was at Focus on the Family, I'm ashamed of this. I won the Scrooge Award without trying. I give an annual award out every year. My nickname was Nuke because I had a serious anger issue. I was very sensitive to people below me, always have been. But if you were like a peer or above me and what you're saying didn't make sense, and we were in a meeting, that was going to be made clear to everyone. I have no clue why they tolerated me. But I treated Phyllis like that. But she never ran from me, and she kept coming back and saying, would you like to have a conversation? And she would listen, and we would talk. And then one day, Phyllis was quitting. And I thought, good, let's get rid of the heretic, clean the place up a little bit, and hopefully not let any more in. I became an executive there later, and attempted to kind of solidify that. But so she's leaving. There's this big party, and there are about as many people here as there were at her going away party. She was very well loved. And I was in another department nearby, connected, and they said, hey, Phyllis is leaving. There's a birthday party or a leaving party. You need to come. And I said, good, no, not coming. And so they eventually sent someone who was superior to me in authority and said, you're coming. And so I had to set aside my work and come to this meeting. And so when I got to the meeting, there were 5 chairs lined up in the front, similar like this, but there were high chairs where your feet are off the ground. I had no idea what was going on, and I was told to sit in the first of the 5 chairs. And then Phyllis began to recount to the whole group how I had helped her in her faith and the virtues of the challenges and the difficulties in dealing with me was a gift to her. And then she took off my shoes and she washed my feet. And I had not had anyone touch me like that. Especially not someone that I treated so poorly. Love built a bridge over which truth can pass. And I don't mean using your stupid turn signals when you change lanes. And I don't mean holding the door as a courtesy. And I don't even mean acting nice. What I mean is getting into the face and into the lives of people who are suffering and looking past all your discomfort and being around them, showing them extraordinary acts of love. And then when the time comes, then it's time to speak, but not until then. So many Catholic parents I talk to, one woman, my husband is such a loser, he won't tell our LGBT alphabet soup kid that they're off the rails and whatever, and I want to say, they're not Christian, why would they listen? Do they know that you love them? We really don't. Catholicism and Christianity in the United States have had this incredibly problematic marriage with politics. It's necessary, I understand. We need the freedom to exercise our religion. But the problem that causes is we come to the table when we're dealing with societal problems and individual issues from the perspective of politics, not from the perspective of the gospel. Jesus didn't give a damn about the politics of the first century. What he cared about was sitting down with people who were hurting and broken and spending time with them. I'm not saying you shouldn't be involved in politics. I'm not saying you shouldn't represent people who are victimized because of the culture and the prevailing culture. But what I am saying is that's not the gospel. That's the necessary clearing of the air a bit and giving room for the gospel. The gospel is, what has Jesus done for you in your life? Why are you Catholic? Why did you stay Catholic? Why did you revert to Catholicism? Why did you become Catholic? What does Jesus mean to you personally? And how do you communicate that to other people? And it can never be words first. one of the dumbest quotes out there that is not true, actually. I heard the worst version not too long ago from a retired priest. He said, preach the gospel all the time, and as a last resort, use words. And I thought, you've distorted the most prominent mythical thing St. Francis ever said into the worst possible version of that. Because he never said it. There's no record in any of his writings or anything anyone ever said. He never said that. The answer is love everybody all the time with extraordinary love by implicating yourself in their lives. Build a bridge of love and then give them Catholic Answers material. But not before then, because you'll just send them away disgusted because they don't know how much you care. I do think it's kind of a trite saying, but people don't. What is it? How does it go? People don't know how much you care, how much you know until they know how much you care. So Phyllis obviously was Catholic, and I was not. But what happened to me in that chair as she washed my feet is I realized that there was something special about her, and that I was interested. But it took me a long time still to get past all the wounds and become Catholic. I'll tell you just about a few other instances, examples that are not there were in my my life, but not directly affecting me. One was my Jewish stepfather. My mother was married 3 times. The 3rd time she got it pretty close to right. And a beautiful Jewish man that she married, he died of cancer, and I loved him to death because he sort of calmed her down and kept her sane. And when he was dying, and I was there, the neighbors came over. He was in hospice in their home. And the neighbors were Baptist. And they said, we'd like to meet with Mel one last time. And she said, no. And he said, let them in. So they went over to his bed, and they shared the gospel with him. And then they left. And my mom said, why the hell did you do that? And he said, because they earned it. They loved us. They were there for us. They had a right to share their love in the most important way that they could from their own hearts. For the people we want to see come to him, have we earned it? Have we loved them enough? Or do we stand off on our high horse with our bumper sticker theology and look for the most, perfect phrase we could insert into the conversation that would suddenly magically convert them, when actually all they feel, because we haven't implicated ourselves in their lives, is hate and judgment? Love built a bridge. Then we can bring truth. Love built a bridge. Another example, Stephanie actually made a priest cry in front of about 400 people. This black Jesuit priest, excellent speaker, heretic, but that's beside the point. So he was talking, and he was talking about his dad, and his dad had passed away. And it was a deep sorrow to him that his dad became an evangelical before he died. But he was Catholic. Obviously, I know some Jesuits aren't, but he was. And he had grown up in Catholic church, and because his dad cared about him, he was poor. But he thought, well, this is the best place for him to be, in Catholic education. And Stephanie stood up and said, I have a question for you. And he said, yes. And she said, why didn't your dad become Catholic? And he began to weep. And he said, I never invited him. I never invited him. He had built a bridge, but he was too fearful because his dad, it's tough to witness to our dads. My dad passed away just a few years ago. Self-made guy, never even had a college degree. I told you he made $1 million by 30. He owned 2 homes by the time he was 30. Rescued and cared for a lot of people, but he was a tough dude. One of his primary giftings was he was able to, this is quite remarkable, he was able to insert the F word in any sentence on any topic. He was a tough guy. And before he died, I remember I had shared with him the gospel. Totally. I mean, as an adult man, as the president of an institution, of a global institution, and I don't have any fear of anyone really. It's sort of a problem. But except my dad. And so it was so hard to share, but every time I went to see him, I would pray the rosary and I'd say, Lord, Blessed Mother, give me an opportunity to share again. And so I did on a number of occasions, usually initiated by him as an answer to that prayer, interestingly enough. Little questions like, does it bother me that I don't believe? Does it bother you that I don't believe the way you believe? So when he was dying, I prayed again. I said, Lord, give me another chance to bring him home. So I prayed for a time when I could meet with him when my family was not around and he was lucid. My family is just a total bunch of lunatics. And so I didn't want to deal with them while I was trying to share the gospel one last time with my father. And so I woke up, I was down the street, he was in the ER, and he was in and out of the ER, but I was down the street at a hotel, woke up in like 1 a.m. in the morning, and I heard, go now. And I thought, oh, he's going to die. I forgot the prayer that I had prayed, let me see him alone. So I thought he was going to die, so I called Stephanie. She was with her family in Costa Rica. Her family's Costa Rican, so she was visiting. I said, start praying the Divine Mercy Chaplet because this is it. I got to the room, and he was only with my estranged brother, who was a cocaine addict, and I hadn't talked with him for like a decade. He was on the other side of the bed, and I could care less. So I said, Dad, I want you to see Linda when you die. This was my closest sibling who died at 35 of a tragic death. And he loved her like crazy. And Linda had come to Christ because I scared the hell out of her. And I mean that literally. I talked with her about hell, and she became a charismatic evangelical. Totally turned her life around. She got out of drugs and promiscuity and got married and settled down. And he loved her like crazy. So when I said, I want you to see Linda when you die, he looked at me and said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, you're going to die, Dad. And I want you to see her in heaven. And he said, I don't understand. And I said, I want to see you when you die. I said, Dad, you're a good man, but being good does not solve the problem of sin. Being good does not solve the problem of sin. And I've told you before, that's why Jesus came, to pay the price for your sin so that you could be reconciled to God. I said, would you like to be forgiven? Oh, God, internally, I'm dying, And he said, yes, I would. And I said, well, then just pray. And he said, I don't know how to pray, in a very gruff voice. And I said, well, then just pray after me. I said, just say this prayer. I said, say, God, please forgive me. So he balls up his fist like a man that he was. And he says, like gritting his teeth, God, please forgive me. One time, and then another time, God, please forgive me. And then a third time, God, please forgive me. And I think the first time was for him and the rest were for me, so I never wonder if he was serious or not. I thought, okay, he had refused to see a priest. I had this awesome priest lined up for him. He was a former Navy SEAL, so he could deal with all the interesting language. He was just the manliest dude. He had this gigantic dog, and I thought, this is going to be perfect. And I asked him twice if he would see the priest, and he said no. And so I had to baptize him, which you can in that kind of a grave circumstance. But I'd been to seminary. I'd been to Bible college. I had gone to seminary? Yeah, I had converted. Yeah, I converted to Catholicism. So I'd been to seminary. I had discerned the priesthood for a time, but I had no training in sacraments. So I'm just like, okay, how do I do this? So I got a styrofoam cup and filled it with water. And I said, in the name of the Father, and I put the water on him. In the name of the Son. And each time he said, wow. In the name of the Son, he says, wow. In the name of the Holy Spirit, wow. That's a little closer to his voice. And So then my brother, interestingly enough, on the side of the bed, I could care less about what was going on with him, he is bawling his head off, which was very interesting. And then we all went to sleep. And we woke up, first thing out of his mouth, "Dan, does this make me a Catholic now?" And I said, "Yeah, Dad, it does." He said, "Good." And then I had to go back. My job was incredibly demanding, and so I had to go back home. And he kept rebounding. He was just the toughest guy on the planet, and very optimistic. And so when I got home, I told Stephanie, I said, I told her what happened, and she said, "You got to have him confirmed. You got to get him communion. He used to get last rites." I'm like, "Oh, dear Jesus," because I was worried. One time, he said yes, and then he said yes to being baptized. And then I thought, I don't know if he'll say yes again. I don't want to hear no, because I want to at least have the hope that I'll get to see him again. So I called him up. And I said, "Dad, will you see a priest?" He said, "Yes." The fruits of the sacrament, baptism, already at work in him. So I got my Navy SEAL priest down to see him, and we set it all up. And so I called him up, and he had received, he was confirmed. He received First Communion. He received last rites, all this stuff. He said, "Dan," he said, "I picked St. Christopher for my confirmation saint. Is that okay?" And I said, "Yeah, Dad, that's great. Are you sure that's okay?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "How'd you pick St. Christopher?" "Only saint I ever heard of." What's crazy is a little side story, not related to the talk, but he loved Stephanie to death. And we were sleeping. We went back, and I ended up sleeping in the ER with Stephanie, in ICU, I mean. And he would wake Stephanie up because I had the important job as president of EWTN News, but I could hear because I'm, he tells Steph, he says, "Stephanie," he said, "St. Christopher's talking to me." Or Christopher is talking to me. And Stephanie says, "Who's Christopher?" She said, "St. Christopher." She says, "What are you talking about?" He said, "My dad knows nothing about the faith. Understand? Never, he'd been to the shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament once, but that was it." And he says, "We're standing at the edge of the water, and we're talking about how to get across." Stephanie says, "You know what the secret is, Dad?" He said, "What's that?" She said, "Surrender." And he said, "That's hard for a man like me." Why are you Catholic? Who is it that you want to reach? Are you trying to reach them through pithy bumper sticker statements? Or are you implicating yourself in their messy, dirty, crummy, strange, repulsive lives? Like Jesus did. That's what he was criticized for the most, was being with the dregs. Unless you build a bridge and they don't care about what you have to say, if you want to reach people in this culture more than any other culture that I'm aware of, at least in the last few hundred years, logic means nothing until the bridge is built. That's when you need to have all your Catholic Answers materials ready. And then you need to speak, but you've got to serve first. You've got to love first. When I was a young evangelical, my pastor was not all that impressed with my zeal because I was still a jerk. And so he had me memorize this passage of scripture that we'll end with that encapsulates all of this. And as I was memorizing it, brought me to tears many times. It goes like this. Chris actually alluded to it in his introduction. "If I speak with the tongue of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all that I have, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not jealous or boastful. It is not arrogant. It doesn't rejoice in the wrong, but rejoices in the right. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends, but as for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. Knowledge, it will pass away. For our knowledge is imperfect, and our prophecy imperfect, but when the perfect comes, the imperfect will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I thought as a child. I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall understand fully as I am fully known. So faith, hope, and love abide. These three, but the greatest of these is love. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.